UCB Life Issues with Paul Hammond.
And a very warm welcome to this week's Life Issues. Sometimes people ask me, how do you prepare for a Life Issues conversation? Well, first of all, I've got a great producer. And we sit down and we talk about what we'd like to explore and what subjects we'd like to pick up. And then we kind of work out who we'd like to talk to about it. Then we ask the guest, well, what do they feel would be a good thing to contribute? Once that's done, I go off and find myself a quiet place somewhere and plan my intro and shape the questions and all that sort of stuff. Except this week, it was a little bit different. Because you see, as I endeavoured to prepare my questions, I typed Steph Macleod into my music app of choice and spent far too much time being distracted by songs like Shining Light and Snake Eyes and Let There Be Light. I'll be honest with you, I was smitten by the music of Steph from the first chord and the first word of Love Changes Everything many years ago. The raw intensity of his music, the authentic, pure quality of his lyrics swept me away, which is part of the reason that he gets played quite a lot on UCB1. And if you want a Christmas treat, well, he used to play with a band called Celtic Worship, and their version of O Holy Night is stunning. So when we were looking to follow up last week's Life Issues about Christmas as a time to let the light in, it was perhaps inevitable that my thoughts would go to Steph, not just because of Let There Be Light, the song he wrote, but also because his story is a story of the light shining into him and bringing transformation from addiction. But it's also an honest appraisal of the fact that the light that shines into us and shines around us is needed for ongoing day-to-day struggles. It doesn't just somehow all get fixed in that first moment of illumination. And also the willingness to acknowledge that the light that shines out of him can make a real difference. And let's be honest, that is a message that perhaps we all need to grasp in our struggles as we move into the new year. And I'm pleased to say that Steph joins me today to talk about his life, his story, and the light that shines. But first, what's all this Celtic worship stuff? Is there an inner Highlander in you looking to get out?
Oh, possibly. First of all, thank you so much for your kind words as well. And my family are from the Isle of Lewis, and we have a croft up there, which I've spent a lot of time on, especially as a kid with my grandparents. And so I am, every time I go up, I have this tug that says, I want to stay here. But I seriously considered it actually at one point and turning the croft into a retreat or a sustainable croft to live with my family. But it was just a bit too disconnected for the stuff that I enjoy doing in the communities that I serve,
Yeah, that little bit of water just makes all the difference, especially in the winter, doesn't it? Music's always been a big part of your life. So as we start to think about your story and what were the early listens for you when it came to your music?
Oh man, that is a long question to answer. And my dad was a massive influence for me growing up. So I grew up listening to Cream, Eric Clapton, Steely Dan, Bob Marley, Jimi Hendrix, all the classics. But there was just loads of stuff. Fleetwood Mac, Led Zeppelin. I don't know if I've said that twice because we listened to a lot of Led Zeppelin. But I remembered listening to Stairway to Heaven on an old tape deck and pressing rewind to learn the guitar parts, you know what I mean? So it was old school.
And a lot of guitarists in there, which of course is your instrument of choice, and ended up doing classical at the Scottish Academy.
I did, yeah. So I was quite a high maintenance kid, but when I discovered music, it kind of just focused a lot of stuff in for me. And I was taught by a wonderful teacher in Edinburgh called Mike McGeary, and a few other people went to a music school, the City of Edinburgh Music School in Edinburgh, and then auditioned for the Royal Scottish Academy, where I studied for a few years. But I mean, that's a bit of a story within itself, because by the time I got there, I was carrying some stuff on my shoulders as well.
And that's an important part of your story, and a story that you acknowledge very clearly, because on the one hand, you had this side of your life where, having journeyed to that point, you had, I suppose, a whole vista of possibilities opening out in front of you by going to the academy and where that might take you, the work that might take you into. But where you actually ended up was homeless, dealing with addiction, and absolute, what most people would describe as rock bottom. How did we get there?
It's a long progression, The addiction is a progressive illness, and there was a multitude of things that could have been attributed to that. It was just being anxious for a lot of my childhood and not understanding what that was. It was my parents splitting up, and this might have been more of a cultural thing. Don't get me wrong, I was looked after, but we don't talk about how we're feeling in Scotland. At least when I was a kid, we didn't really have many emotional role models. Unless you go to the football, you're allowed to get emotional then. And I was in the wrong place at the wrong time when I started experimenting with alcohol, and I nearly lost my life and just became terrified of everything. And from that point, my drinking increased exponentially, because I thought that was the only way that I could cope with the way that I was feeling and the symptoms of what I would later discover was post-traumatic stress disorder. And
as you went to the academy, and as you were faced with those sort of choices, was it just was the pressure of that the thing that kind of pushed you in the opposite direction?
No, not at all. The teachers and the staff at the academy were absolutely brilliant, and in hindsight, I'm surprised they put up with me for as long as they did, because I was completely lost, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and I'm pretty sure I was alcoholic before I went there. And being a student, I don't know what it's like these days, but heavy drinking as a student, for an alcoholic anyway, being a student's a perfect place to hide. Even when I didn't know, and for me, I thought it was a fresh start, and you get all this money thrown at you from the bank, which isn't really yours, and my priorities were all mixed up. And I did work sometimes, and they did their best to help me, but when I was unable to pass my academic exams, they said you can't continue on this course anymore. So I finished my degree elsewhere, which was fair enough, but they tirelessly tried to help me. They really were amazing.
So how bad did it get, and how far did you fall?
Yeah, homelessness is a graft, it's a 24/7 job. Not everybody's alcoholic or struggling with addiction, especially these days. It's almost like a social class, and you get people there that have just fallen on hard times. And but for me, it was the insanity of addiction just told me that I needed to leave home so that I could feed my addiction in peace. And I was in and out of homeless hostels. Unfortunately, when I drank, I thought people were trying to attack me, so I was quite aggressive. And they have a zero tolerance for that. So I spent a good bit of time on the streets or sofa surfing or just trying to survive, because my addiction just consumed every aspect of my life. And it was, but it was the cold, staying out in the cold in Edinburgh in the winter, which is very wet, because it wasn't so much staying warm, it was about staying dry, because you were in a lot of trouble if you got wet, And after Christmas 2005, I realised that if I didn't do something, I was going to die. And I begged, I stole, I did things for money that I never imagined ever having to do. But when you're afraid, fear will make you do anything, And it is all consuming, 24/7. Like I said, no breaks, no holidays, and it'll cost you everything.
People often wonder why those who are living rough, who are taking the risk of what the weather can do, but also what other people can do while you're on the streets. People say, well, why didn't you just go home? Surely you got family that cared about you. Surely there were people that you could have turned to. Surely there was somewhere you could have gone. What would your experience, what response would that give to when people talk like that?
It's complicated. It's very complicated. I think I read somewhere that, there's normally a breakdown within relationships that can lead to somebody declaring themselves as homeless, but there's always other factors as well, and it's usually quite unique to the individual. I could have gone back to my mum's or my dad's and had somewhere to stay on the basis that I was sober, but I just didn't want to do that, and that's the insanity of the addiction. I would have rather been cold out on the streets with a bottle of whatever than have to go home and sit sober and literally, be in my own skin, and that just terrified me. So in terms of homelessness, and I mean, it's very, very difficult to actually get somewhere to stay now if you're homeless. It's certainly not easy staying in a homeless hostel. It's there's a lot of problems with people having difficulties within their life, and they are varied. Like I said, some people struggle with addiction, some people struggle with just maybe having lost their job and they're with their families and stuff like that. So it's complex. It's not as easy as, well, why can't you find somewhere to stay? You just need to look at the housing market just now. It's crazy.
You said the idea of sitting at home sober in order to have a roof over your head terrified you. What was it about being sober that terrified you?
Having to sit with myself, I think, I've especially with the anxiety. Alcohol and drugs are fantastic emotional painkillers until they stop working. And they're not a great solution either. And they fundamentally, alcoholics, we drink to feel differently. And I just could not bear the anxiety anymore or the emotional pain. I wasn't even sure what it was, And for when I learned when I was a teenager that I could feel different by putting something into my body, and unfortunately, when that wears off, it's like everything comes back in abundance. So it was just this vicious cycle. And once I started, I just couldn't stop. Yeah. And when I did stop, I was obsessing about drinking again, which kind of differentiates an alcoholic to a regular drinker.
Do you think that that's something that those of us who have never been there need to realize about addiction, but especially about homeless who are addicted? Because there's a lot of talk, isn't there, about, if you see somebody who's homeless, don't give them money because they'll use it to feed their addiction. But actually, their addiction is what's driving their every waking moment.
It is debatable. I mean, I don't tend to give to homeless people financially, but I will give to homeless charities because they're well versed in the needs. And the addicts and alcoholics, we're clever people, man. We're not mental in terms of we know what we're doing and we know how to get what we need. And people are kind, and when they see people struggling, they want to help them. And people are generally very, very kind. And begging is easy money as well. It really is. So I tend now to give to homeless charities. The only time I will help an alcoholic is when I think that they're rattling, which is they're withdrawn from alcohol, and it usually takes an alcoholic to spot that, and it's really dangerous. So that I'll buy them a can, just so they can get themselves together and maybe go and get a bit of help or whatever. But that's only happened once or twice. I've got to keep myself safe as well. You know what I mean? But it's a rare thing that I give money to somebody begging in the streets, because not everybody's as homeless as they seem as well, you know what I mean? So I tend to give money to a charity that can put the money to good use.
So you know where it's going to go. You're listening to UCB Life Issues. I'm talking this week to Steph Macleod. Steph's story is that he fell, as we've just heard, to a very dark place in his life, a place of addiction and of homelessness. But as his song, Let There Be Light, reveals, the light of God shining into a place can make all the difference. Not necessarily an easy journey, though, for that difference to come about. But there was a very real sense that one day your eyes were opened, wasn't it? Yeah,
and that was very unexpected, actually. I ended up in a homeless hostel in February 2006, run by the Bethany Christian Trust, who are a homeless charity. They gave me a place to stay. I got my appetite back, and I dried out from years of drinking, and it was a safe space. They had a recovery program which was very Jesus focused, which, I wasn't complaining really. It was just, it didn't kind of tick all the boxes for me at that point. But I went to hear a man give his testimony one night. I went for the free food because I'm an absolute foodie. I think it was a 5-course dinner, and I'd never experienced that before, and was naturally curious, So I went for the food, and then a chap gave his testimony, and it absolutely blew my mind and changed my life.
What was it that you heard that night? What do you remember as the standout that changed your life?
It was the message. And I spent a bit of time in the years prior to that trying to find this guy. He's a good friend of mine now. He's a guy called Cammy Mackenzie, wonderful church minister. But I thought he was going to tell me how much I needed what he had, and if I didn't have it, I wasn't worth anything. Just stereotypes. And I thought as a church minister, he hadn't known any kind of hardship, and he was a goody two-shoes, blah, blah. But his life story, his testimony is incredible. He'd been in prison. He'd been an addict as well, and he spoke about how making the decision to follow Jesus had just changed everything in his life. And there was two things. One was God gave him the strength to break the chains that were killing him, and the power to walk away from that life reborn in hope. Which, I'll be honest, I'd never heard anything really like that, and all I heard was freedom and hope. I didn't really understand it, but I heard freedom and hope, and then he said there's no such thing as 50% free. It's all or nothing. You can't have your foot halfway in the door, so if you want to be free in Christ, you got to surrender and give him everything. And I had this feeling it was weird. It was almost like I really wanted it, but I was quite scared to go up when we were invited for prayer, because my mates were there as well, and it was but I wanted it, and I did go up, and when I look back, there was quite a few of us that went up and accepted Jesus as our saviour. And when we prayed, I'm quite a skeptical guy. I've got trust issues just through my experiences, but I felt that something happened within me. I said, God, if I just want a life worth living, and if that means following you, then I'm all in. If you can hear me, I think I said that as well. If you're really there, And I felt just this incredible sense of peace wash over me, which might not sound like much to somebody else, but when you've been full of anxiety and dread your whole life, it just broke me. And there was this paradigm shift from suddenly thinking I was alone in the center of the universe to realizing that I wasn't, and I knew I wasn't alone anymore, which was a very, very powerful thing. And that was the start of a very, very awesome journey.
But a long journey, and a journey which, you talk about the importance of people around you, because we have this sense that God's light shines into our lives, and it's almost like we go, oh, well, and that was it, and suddenly I was transformed and everything was perfect. And of course, that's far from the reality for everybody, because it's an ongoing journey. But you talk about the importance of fellowship and community around you, and other people allowing, if you like, the light of Jesus to shine from the love of Jesus to shine from them into your life. That was an important element, right from the start?
Yes, I think in different ways, actually. As a young Christian, you're just hungry. You have this spiritual hunger, and it wasn't long. And I think I went to church that Sunday and made friends, and it was just, I was soaking up everything. I didn't even know what to do. I remember, I think, asking my friend, who's now my wife, and I said, how do you be a Christian? What do you do? And she was like, just listen. And we used to go to Bible studies, and I'd do that with my friend and my friends as well. And, you just bring everything. So that suddenly I went from a guy that spent most of his time on his own. I was an isolator in terms of drinking and stuff like that. I didn't drink communally to suddenly having a church family. And it was just wonderful, man, seeing people worship for the first time. And it's almost like, man, they get what I get. They know how I feel. And it was just all about Jesus. Especially my first pastor, Craig Sale, who was just such a wonderful preacher. And that community certainly helped me to see where my path was,
And helped you with the, if I might, small d maybe, but the demons that you had to face, because you had struggled all your life with anxiety. You said your mental health was a real issue for you while you were homeless. That didn't transform overnight when you became a Christian. The importance of people around you in those times of struggles is something that you talk freely about, but not everybody appreciates the value of what they can give to people who are going through those sorts of difficulties.
It was a difficult time, actually, sort of looking in hindsight. So when I got off alcohol, I was still quite heavily medicated in terms of I was taking antidepressants and other tablets. And there is a time and a place for medication. I think medical professionals can certainly guide you in that stuff. But for me, it was certainly helping with post-traumatic stress. I wasn't aware of at the time. I just knew that it helped me to cope, but I was quite emotionally numb. But I do think that when I asked Jesus to come into my life and I had this massive change in mindset of being alone, that was a massive step forward for me, and being able to integrate within communities without feeling crippled with anxiety. I was still unable to get honest about some of the things that happened when I was homeless and when I was a teenager, through fear of being judged. But I did my best at the time with what I had and what I knew. And it wasn't until much later. And don't get me wrong, there was some great stuff that happened in my life in the years that came. So I got married, I had kids, I started writing songs and was told that I had a ministry. And I started traveling fundamentally for me, that there was some stuff buried right down, which I wasn't prepared to open up about to anyone. And I had, even though I was a lot more honest than I had this mask on that everything was fine, and that just rotted to the point that when I was about 8 years sober, I just my mental health fell off a cliff, and ended up picking up a drink, which just smashed everything to pieces at that time, So to answer your question, the community that I first encountered, it was an absolute lifesaver for me, coming out of a place of homelessness and seeing how people were in the church and the love and the compassion that they had for me, and they saw the potential in me. They saw, I think they shone light, and they invited me into their homes, and we had Bible studies, man. I never thought anybody would ever do that to me, because I was a scallywag, But they just loved me. But further down the line, things got tough because I wasn't able to open up about some really dark stuff.
And it is, I suppose, when you have moved forward and there is expectation around you, and you have a ministry, and you're sharing a stage with some pretty high-profile Christian artists, and your talent is shining, and everybody is full. People like me are going, "You're brilliant! It's brilliant! I love your music," and all that sort of stuff. I suppose that makes it harder to actually shine a light onto some of those dark areas that still remain, because if they come out, well, how are people going to react? How's life going to be? What's the community? How are they going to respond when they have these expectations of?
I certainly used to think like that. I think one of the unfortunate truths about the music industry is that it tends to have this, even from the secular world, it's about networking. It's about, success is based on getting a number one, or how many records you sell, or who you know, and stuff like that. And me being quite ignorant and a young Christian, I just thought that's the way the Christian world worked as well. And I didn't really have that many friends. I had acquaintances, and at first it was just about sharing the gospel, and then slipping into this, okay, you're getting onto this festival, this could be really great, and I could get to share with more people. And the one thing I hate about being in music ministry is the fact that I'm involved. You know what I mean? Like having my picture taken, that I have a profile and stuff. I quite like my privacy and stuff like that. But I do I take it as one of these things, because fundamentally it's about sharing the gospel for me. I mean, as long as somebody was brave enough and honest enough to share their testimony with me and it changed my life, and if I can somehow do that, and Christ can have an impact on somebody else's life, then that's what brings me life. I see that as an amazing privilege. And even music just seems to be the way that it's happened. And after I got ill the first time, and kind of reassessed and found out a lot of stuff about me. And I had some wonderful Christian friends that really kind of helped to steward me and some stuff when I opened up about my difficulties. They were like, listen, man, don't make it about the networking or how many songs you've written or any of that kind of stuff. Just go and be yourself and make some friends.
Yes,
and, God will take care of the rest. And it was an absolute game changer. A lovely man called Doug Ross, actually, he taught me all that stuff. And it's all right to be ambitious and want to do the best in what you do, but I think for me, I just caught up in this trajectory that was going up. You know what I mean? And it suddenly, and at the time, I don't think I would have been honest about it and said this is all for Jesus, because I actually really enjoyed touring and selling records and all that kind of stuff. And once I realised how fragile I was like, well, this is not what I started out to do. I just wanted to show God's love the way it was shown to me. And thankfully, God put me good people like Doug and on my path that just kind of helped me to see the truth and the gift of what it is to share the gospel. So I was grateful for that.
And that opportunity, we're very much tying it around the imagery that's in Let There Be Light. And I mean, it's a brilliant song. I love the video that goes with it as well. But the imagery around that is very much about letting the light shine out. And I know that actually, as well as with your music and as well as performing, to be able to work with other groups that allow that light of your experience. As you say, somebody was very brave and they shared their testimony. You've been given the opportunity to do the same. It's a powerful testimony. It's a very real, it's a very honest testimony about the ongoing reality of what you struggle with. But at the same time, there's an awful lot of people need to hear that. So working with other organizations to let that light out is important for you.
Yeah, I have had the privilege of serving with loads of great people, and the work that they do. These guys are just amazing. So people like Compassion, Junction 42, which is a prison ministry, I absolutely love. The stuff that they did for prisoners in the UK in lockdown was just incredible, and I had the privilege of just having a little part in that, and other people. There's charities abroad like Eric's Helping in Sweden, which is a children's charity, the Bethany Christian Trust, very close to my heart with the stuff that they do for the homeless, and also with the NHS. So I volunteer once a week in a addiction centre, which is just it's so life-giving, and it's part of the programme that I follow within my recovery. Just pouring love into other people seems to help me with my own self-esteem, which can be pretty choppy at times, you know what I mean? And for me, that's all biblical, the way Jesus reached out and just loved others and showed us how to love each other, and the power of community and fellowship. I just it's stuff I really took for granted or just didn't know about, and it's so life-giving.
But I read something that you wrote about your role in this. You wrote something along the lines of, I only provide music, songs about walking with Jesus and about mental health battles, addiction, recovery. And you wrote about how when people respond to you, you are overwhelmed by the letters of thanks that you get and how that impacted you. Is it so hard for you to see how what you do is a meaningful tool that God uses?
Sometimes, I still have to catch myself. And I think this is a personal thing. So I struggle with my inner critic still to this day. I was listening to a podcast in the gym yesterday about all the different types of inner critics that we have, and mine's it's pretty fearsome, and I think it's based on my experience and trauma and stuff like that. But I'm overwhelmed that I can be of service to somebody, or at least carry a message, because when I compare the things that have happened in my life to a life of homelessness and addiction to the things that I've experienced walking with Jesus, when somebody writes to say this has made me think about my walk with Jesus, I get overwhelmed, because I'm like, if God can take a man like me off the streets and bless me with the things that I've experienced with children, with love, with friends, a family, I'm just overwhelmed that God's going to have an impact in their life. And that really excites me. Like, because when I do my gigs and when I get to share, it's not about me at all. I want people to believe in thinking about what their walk with Jesus is like. That's what that really fills me with excitement, you know what I mean? Because I still can't believe what Christ has done in my life sometimes. And sometimes I give myself a hard time for certain things, but that's just stuff I'm coming through. I wouldn't change anything, man, because it means I wouldn't see the world the way that I do now. But you know, it's a daily thing, one day at a time, as they say.
Somebody should write a song on that basis, shouldn't they? It is incredible, isn't it, the way in which our lives kind of lead us to a point. And I know that there is that sort of idea that in order to be able to sing the blues, you got to pay your dues. In order to be able to give out, you have to have lived the experience and so on. And when you look back and you see those terrible things that you went through and the terrible struggles that you've had and the ongoing nature of struggles with your mental health, and like you say, addiction never goes away. It's wrong to imagine that just because somebody's been dry or sober for X number of years, that's the problems have all gone. But when you look back, are you actually able to see that not that those things were good, they were never good, but actually there were points that God was preparing you through them to actually make something that is substantive now?
That's an interesting question. I wouldn't wish addiction or homelessness on anyone.
No.
It's horrific, man. But I am so lucky to have come through what I've come through and survived, you know. And I've lost many friends. And it's addiction or alcoholism. We suffer with it for the rest of our lives, but we can find reprieve on a daily basis with recovery. And you know, that starts with handing everything to God. It really does. Stuff I really took for granted, getting on my knees every morning and just asking God to carry me through. I didn't realize that I needed to pray because my life depended on it, you know, until somebody else said, listen, this is what's working for me, man, and I'm sober. And it's, you know, we don't just pray because we're Christians, we pray because we need God. Mm-hmm. We do need him. And I do it because my life depends on it now, you know, and it's actually, I actually really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. And one day, I suppose I could sum up your question in one experience, and that was when I was with my daughter one day. I was on the phone and she came in when I got off the call and she said, "Do you want a hug, Dad?" And I went, "I'd love a hug." And we had a cuddle, and I was like, "Why did you come in and give me a cuddle?" And she said, "I heard you talking to your friend and I thought you could do with one." And I went, "Yeah, I had a session with my therapist today and we were talking about being homeless and stuff, and I found I was quite emotional, and I said, but I wouldn't change any of it because it means I would always end up right here, right now, getting to give you a cuddle, you know." And one of the great things about having gone through something is you're able to recognize similar challenges that somebody else might face. And I know now that I wasn't able to get out of some of these situations on my own, but I was able to do it with somebody that had gone through similar experiences. And that has been very powerful in my life in terms of having community and fellowship.
When you wrote Let There Be Light, I mean, for me, listening to it, there's an obvious message in it that it is the importance, the need, not just for the light to shine the once, but for there to be an ongoing experience, an ongoing outpouring, if you like, of the light of God into not only the world, but people's lives and so on. And as I say, I find it a very powerful song. And particularly when I heard about some of the struggles, you mentioned lockdown, and you mentioned coming out of lockdown, some of the struggles that you'd had with that. So how does that tie in for you with the ongoing journey? Because we know what God has brought you from, we know what he's brought you into, we know what he has opened up to you. But the ongoing journey, it sounds as though it's still hard work.
Yeah, it's hard work, but it's worth it. And it's absolutely necessary for me to continue to serve, but also be kind to myself and caring towards myself, which is something I've not been able to do for a large part of my life, actually. You know, I think I love the gift of service. I love to be able to give to others. It's a stark contrast to the kind of person I was when I was homeless and being an addict and just very self-destructive. And it's difficult to learn new things and when you've been so ingrained with old behaviours, you know, but I have had a lot of help with that. For me, the song Let There Be Light is about struggling with loneliness as a Christian, you know. There's a lot of feelings and emotions that don't make sense to me if I'm a Christian, you know, but it's like, why are there days when I feel like God is so distant? And this is purely personal experience, but I found that when I'm so wrapped up in self, or if I'm hurting, or I find it very difficult to connect spiritually. Very, very difficult. It's only when looking back through a process that I've been through that I start to understand it and see that God was with me the whole way. I just wasn't able to acknowledge it because I was so wrapped up in me. And I needed help to get through that, you know. The song is about crying out to God because I just feel overwhelmed with loneliness, even though I know I'm anchored to heaven's door. And, you know, what comes after the darkest night, it's new mercies every morning. And that's where I placed my hope. And he's brought me through everything. I just needed help getting through some of the stuff that I was unable to find my way out of. And I'm very, very grateful for that. And as you know, moving forward, that's where I have my hope. You know, I have my hope when I get on my knees in the morning, and I know that Christ is walking with me every step of the way. And some of these challenges that I face, I'm not seeing them as oh, woe is me anymore. It's like, okay, this is a grow day. It's not a bad day. It's a grow day, you know. So what can I learn from this? I don't have the answers. Let's pray about it. Let's speak to somebody else who might have had a similar experience. And it's okay to ask for help, you know what I mean? It takes a lot of courage to surrender and ask for help more than just being full of pride and fighting to the death, man. And that was a tough one for me because I'm, at my core, a very self-sufficient man. And that's not a good place to be if you're recovering or if you're living with mental health things, you know what I mean? So I'm very, very grateful.
Yeah, I think somewhere else I saw you wrote that the uphill struggle is real, but when it is a grow day, the view from the top is worth it.
Yeah. It's mind-blowing. You get these moments, these wee moments, where you're just so grateful to God. I still can't believe I'm alive, you know. I just, it's just miraculous that I shouldn't have been here so many times, man. And if, like last year coming out of lockdown, my mental health fell off a cliff, and if it hadn't been for my brothers in Christ, I don't think I would be here. But I got the help and I did the work and took some time out and been convalescing, but slowly moving back forward into things. The landscape's a bit different, but I'm very, very grateful.
It strikes me as we chat today that my interpretation of that song obviously comes from my own personal experience and my understanding of life. Your interpretation of it comes from your experience, and in fairness, you're the guy who wrote it, so you should know what it's about. But I wonder how much the writing of your music and the creating of these songs that reveal Jesus, that encourage people to worship Jesus, that call on Jesus, how much of that is catharsis for you personally, as well as ministry for reaching out? I mean, is the music really one of the tools that God is using to help Steph Macleod recover and grow, as well as the rest of us be inspired?
Absolutely. It's I started writing songs in the homeless hostel in 2006. I'd never sang before. And I didn't realize at the time I was singing songs about being homeless and addiction as a way to process what I was going through. It's quite an emotional journey. I feel very emotionally free when I sing, and when I sing in worship, it's the most freeing place I've ever experienced. Writing songs, it's almost like you're just, for myself, I lean into that process of what's going on, and it's very cathartic. I mean, I love reading into Bible verses and old hymns and things like that. And for me, it's like a time with God, but also helps me to explore what I'm going through. And absolutely, songwriting is a wonderful way for myself, who's probably not the most emotionally mature man, to explore what's going on within me. So it's certainly very, very cathartic and very healing, and it can be very difficult and challenging sometimes. But it is a journey which I'm very grateful for.
What for the future? When you stand and look down the road now, with all that you've come from, all that you've experienced, the lessons you've learned about the input of other people, as well as the value of what you give out, what does the future say to you? What does the ongoing journey say to you?
That's a great question. I think it's I'm always brought back to a line that Pat Barrett wrote, which is life is a gift and the giver is good, and life is a gift even when it doesn't feel like it, and I can only do the best that I can with what I've got today. And if I can hand that over to God, then I think I'll get through this day okay. I'm looking forward to a new season of writing some hymns with my friends and exploring some of the tough stuff, about what's been happening within me coming through the last couple of years. And, some of these songs I don't think might even make it to a recording studio. They might do, but I just want to write some very honest songs from me to God, and not have any expectations about that. But moving forward, I was joking with my friend the other day. I said, essentially I'm halfway through my life and it's been a bit of a whopper. I says, how am I going to top the next half? And we were coming up with mad theories about how we could make the next 40 even more dramatic. And but you know what? It's an absolute blessing just to walk with Jesus and be with friends and share experiences, or have a cup of coffee, or just smile at somebody, or be of service and take some time to rest. And I don't know if this is just a getting older thing, but you start to notice the world a little bit more and be a bit more appreciative to the things that give you life, even the struggles as well. I become more grateful for my challenges. So moving forward, I'm just looking to take my time and just do my best, and know my limits as well. I know my limits because that's something I didn't fully know. So I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but I am excited. I just know that it's okay to be me, and whatever I do is going to be okay.
And maybe that's the point for all of us, that it is an absolute blessing just to walk with Jesus and to recognize our limits, but to also see the reality of the difference that his light shining into us can make, and that his light shining through others into us can make, and also that his light shining through us for others can make a difference too. Steph, privilege and lovely to speak to you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. It's been an absolute honour. Thank you so much.
I'm Paul Hammond. You've been listening to UCB Life Issues. Thank you also to my producer, Rachel, for helping get the show on the road. And why not join me next week for another Life Issues? Ta-da.